Hey everyone, this is Cameron from Renegade Animation on renegadepopculture.com. If you like what we do, please give us a like, a follow, and a share on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to us. We are everywhere. Make sure to share out our episodes, and if you can, consider supporting our Patreon. That way we can keep doing what we love and not talking about the delicious world of animation. And now, on with the show.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Renegade Animation on the Renegade Pop Culture Podcast Network. My name is Mike. I'll be your host this evening. Joining me, as always, is the animation guru himself, Cameron.
Howdy, howdy.
And boy, we got a delicious episode for you today. We are finally talking about the first season of Delicious in Dungeon, or Dungeon Meshi, whichever title you prefer. But before we get there, we actually haven't done an indie spotlight in quite a bit, but the timing of this one worked out really well. On Thursday, June 20th, we got the pilot for Dungeon Flippers. Cameron, do you want to describe to our audience what this is all about?
So for our new indie spotlight, we are talking about the Travis Fowler created pilot of Dungeon Flippers, which, it's funny, we're talking about anime, and the first thing that popped up when I watched this pilot were shows like Dragon Goes House Hunting, which this could be the indie fantasy equivalent to that anime that we talked about maybe 3 years ago now. Man,
something like that.
flies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can't believe it's been that long.
Yeah, exactly. It's about a manticore and dragon duo, Molly and Cleveland, as they find new fantastical housing for their clients. The first episode is really just them figuring out how to help this very indecisive wizard who has lived out in the outskirts in the middle of nowhere for years and wants to be more known about it. So that's really what it is. If you saw, again, Dragon Goes House Hunting, where it dives into the world and the, quirky nature of real estate work, you will get that same kind of experience here that you would with that show. It reminds me of a little bit of how Pixar did Onward, because you have a pseudo-modern job in this fantastical world, but instead of just this is near some wonderful schools or a grocery store, this one's this has amazing magical properties or traps galore, or hey, we would love to sell this dungeon, but there's a bunch of dead bodies in floor 3, room 25, and we really gotta work on that before we sell this to the next overlord or demon fiend or what have you and such.
Yeah, a very fun premise. I kind of love whenever fantasy meets the mundanity of the real world. Those two just make a great combination. And the jokes are just very funny as well.
They are. I just love the nonchalant reaction Cleveland has when their client, the Ace of Wands, turns a random civilian into a frog. It's just another day on the job. The designs also remind me of something akin to some of the more recent Disney shows like The Owl House and Star versus the Forces of Evil, especially with Molly's design, which is very cute. I love the animation detail that when she runs on all four. It's a very delightful show. I think my one criticism I have for this is that the sound design could have been better.
I was going to say that there's a lot of fine tuning that they have to do, not just with the sound design, but I think the pacing could have been a little bit tighter. It doesn't make or break the pilot. It's still just very entertaining in its own right. It's just those little screws that need to be tightened, and this would be perfect.
I think the problem is that it's a very straightforward premise with, of course, with all pilots, some inkling of world building and personal drama for our main character, Molly. But the sound design is what irked me a little more, because it felt way too quiet. And maybe it just wasn't in the budget to have a better sound design or something. But like when she gets mad and jumps from the tower to like flip out onto their client, the fire burning behind her was very just silent.
I see what you mean.
Like the voice cast sounded good. I loved our three actors that we got to see, and their chemistry works well off of one another, with Molly being the more optimistic go-getter while Cleveland is the more like controlled, like realistic one of the two. But there just needed to be more sound effects. It's like how sometimes we've talked about certain shows that are on like Netflix or whatever, where it's just like this should feel more bombastic than it does.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I found this to be a wholly unique pilot. There's nothing really to compare it and contrast to in the indie animation scene, which, I'm always looking for that when I watch a new pilot. Because if I see something and I either, well, mostly in a negative light, say, like, well, this is very similar to this one. Why should I watch this one over that one? But here, there's nothing there. Or at the very least, I am not aware of any other upcoming or already released pilots that have a more fantastical setting to compare and contrast to. And it's really charming. I hope we get more of this one. And they already have a store set up where you can buy merchandise for Dungeon Flippers. And hopefully, the indie animation scene and fans go out to support this one. Like, this came out 4 days ago, and yes, 200,000 views is a good number, but that's still low to what a lot of these indie productions need to keep the lights on and to keep making more of these episodes.
Give this one a watch because you'll have fun with it. And I'm looking at the merch store right now. I would honestly buy a couple of these shirts and other accessories because I like these designs. I like characters. I'm probably gonna get that Mind Your Business shirt because that one looks pretty cool.
I like the Quest to Impress shirt. I think that's a very cute one. And this is just something that we talk about when you are distinct and unique in your execution and setup. That helps me into your show more than just watching someone else try to make something aping off of whatever the biggest success is. Which is really why our main topic for today, Delicious and Dungeon, aka Dungeon Meshi, is like it's such a good example of. So, the show came out back in January of 2024 with a weekly release, which is shocking because it's on Netflix since they're very, inconsistent with what they want to release weekly or want to release all at once. And is based off of the manga by Ryoko Kui, the anime TV series being directed by Yoshihiro Miyajima, written by Kimiko Ueno, and is animated by the prolific and very iconic Studio Trigger, with Yasunori Mitsuda and Shunsuke Tsuchiya as the composers. We follow an eclectic group of adventurers who must venture back down into the dungeon because the main character, Laios, lost his sister to Fallon to a red dragon encounter where they almost basically bit the dust. Total party knockout. But Fallon was able to teleport them out of the dungeon, and when they get out of it, Laios finds out that, well, like a third of his party leaves him, and he's stuck with Marcel, a cautious half elf magician, and Chilchuck, a half-foot or, halfling rogue and locksmith, and not a lot of supplies and resources to pretty much handle the dungeon if they go back down instantly to try to save Fallon. But Laios finds a workaround. Since they don't want to sell off their equipment and they don't have enough money to buy food and supplies, they're going to go back down into the dungeon, and to make up for the lack of resources and supplies, are going to, well, eat any of the monsters they encounter down there. When they get down there, they meet a dwarf fighter or warrior named Senshi, voiced by the always fantastic Sungwon Cho.
Yes.
And he starts to teach them, the party, about how to cook these monsters. And then the four make their way down through the different levels, solving any situations that get thrown at them, and of course, have a delicious, well-rounded meal whenever they can. So, we talk a lot about in our anime podcast how just rotten the fantasy / isekai genre can be. Not that it's always terrible, but it's always the first genre to get annoying to us, and I think to most anime fans, because it's usually the biggest genre out of every season, and a majority of the shows are extremely derivative of one another. Even if the execution is handled well, and some do rise above the occasion, we are still stuck with the fact that most fantasy shows and most isekai shows tend to get made and greenlit because they are the popular genre, and the creatives are all cannibalizing one another by stealing or paying homage or copying one another, which is how we can get multiple isekais about people who train slimes in one season. And that happens a lot of the times. So that's why we're always so critical of the genre. Not because we hate it, but because there's so much bountiful possibilities with the genre that to see it just get stuck in a rut is constantly infuriating. Because when we see stuff like Delicious in Dungeon, it shows what happens when you take the time and put in enough care, or if you can, or have enough creativity and imagination to make it stand out while still dealing with the nonsense that is the manga and anime industry.
Yeah, a lot of repetition. We keep threatening to make an isekai bingo card, and one day I might actually do that, but for now, I just want to luxuriate in the fact that Delicious Dungeon is just a delight from start to finish.
I mean, I'll spoil what I think about the show overall. It might be my favorite anime of the year so far. I loved some of the other anime that come out very much, but Delicious in Dungeon was the one show I have consistently watched weekly since its January 4th release on Netflix. I tuned in every Thursday to watch every episode and see how the story unfolds and what new tasty meal they make next. So let's break down the overall appeal of Delicious in Dungeon. With this fantasy world, first of all, no video game logic. I mean, there are maybe like stuff inspired by video games in it, but there's no level system or menu options and such. There's no reference that it's a video game. Or like how Goblin Slayer is very like hit or miss with, is it a fantasy video game or is it like a tabletop game that a bunch of people are playing and such. Here, it's pure fantasy. I think that's what makes it feel refreshing, because you don't have to deal with an isekai main character or a harem of like anime waifu girls and what have you and such. This show is way more interested with the journey of our four leads and what they take away from their constant monster encounters and who they run into in the dungeon or dealing with the consequences of their actions. Like how Marcel pours hot water back into the water without thinking, oh, geez, we might piss off a water spirit. And for what, like 2 or 3 episodes, it was all about them dealing with that one spirit or
Hmm.
Undine. I just like that. There's nothing getting in the way of it. They introduce world building and storytelling very casually through the 24 episode run of this first season.
I want to give a shout out to Mother's Basement, who, as the timing of this couldn't have been better, a couple days before we recorded this, Jeff put out a video going quite in depth with the world building of this series and why it's just so perfectly crafted.
And I also like that they keep, at least for now, the inhabitants of this world very straightforward and like to a minimal species count. Because you have your humans, your elves, your dwarves, your halflings, your gnomes, your orcs, your oni, and the kobolds, which I know a lot of people were like, well, wait a minute. Kobolds are like little lizard dudes. What happened there? For those that don't know, kobolds in like the very original Dungeons and Dragons were more dog like. So the jump from little lizard men to moving them back to their original dog like incarnations is not that big of a leap of logic. And for some reason, kobolds are only little lizards in US based fantasy stuff in
Oh,
world
okay,
building.
that
So,
that makes more sense.
yeah, for some reason, and I could probably look into this a little more, the kobolds in Japan have always been dog like. So I just think that's a fun little bit of world building that the creator obviously put a lot of time into, especially with how she sets up this dungeon and how the different species interact with one another. Less demanding species are in the upper levels of the dungeon, whereas more demanding species and like bigger creatures are in the lower levels, which just makes sense because if you have a red dragon jaunting around the second floor of the dungeon, something horrifically wrong happened with the environment of the dungeon. And I think that's very cool. There's a, instead of just, sitting with its premise of fantasy party kills monsters and eats them, there's a lot of commentary about the ecosystem and how Senshi tells everyone take only what you need, do not take more than what is given to you.
I was just about to bring that up, how there is a bit of in a weird way, like an educational aspect to this series, not just in the recipes that are created in pretty much every episode, but you get to learn a thing or two about how an ecosystem is maintained and respecting nature and all of that.
Because a lot of the episodes, especially when they're in the, I think, third level where they have to deal with more water based enemies,
Hmm.
that was a huge plot point of why was there a kraken this high up in the dungeon. And that's because of adventurers and, of course, Marcel being a little reckless with her spellcasting, causing disruption within the environment and ecosystem. Because, yes, they needed to take care of all those bladefish, But take so many of them out results in mermen not finding enough food and them having to go find something else, which then also means that the Kraken is going to rise up and eat them and whatever else it can find because of the disruption in the environment. There's a lot of cool world building, and I think what's so good about it is the fact that I never felt like I was being told this is the exposition dump of the episode. Like, you know how a lot of anime to save on time and money, or, a lot of shows do this. They just have characters standing around telling us instead of showing us. Delicious in Dungeon finds that balance of show and tell that makes for a viewer to get more engrossed into the world that these characters live in.
It also helps that like we enjoy these characters and we just want to spend as much time with them as possible.
There's also a lot of like really good representation also.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have characters on the spectrum, you have characters of color. It's so fleshed out, and it's impressive because most fantasy shows in the anime scene never quite reach this natural world building and just representation, because a lot of anime are made by people who are just copying one another. So they're just going to keep giving us like the same characters over and over and over again. But what's different about this is that these feel like new characters, even if we've seen some of the archetypes here.
Oh, yeah, sure. But the characters are all kind of unique in their own ways. Also, it's kind of cool how there's two non-binary actors in this cast.
It's like on screen and behind the scenes, there's a lot of really good work being done with casting and character creation. Like, I hear this all the time when people are trying to make realistic fantasy and medieval video games. And there's always just like, okay, well, why is it just mostly white people? And they're like, well, that's just realistic. And it's just like, oh, you're going off of how Hollywood used to write Westerns, aren't you? Oh, you poor child. It finds a way to weave the clashes between the different people among the humans and among the different races. There's a reason why the head of the island that this whole show takes place on discriminates against dwarves, and how they are also very flippant about the elves, who the elves have, due to their long lifespan, are like basically saying, yeah, we're better than you. We can absolutely take care of this without you guys jumping in. All the way down to the magic system that they weave into the dialogue while also showing us these details instead of just being like, here's a bunch of characters standing around. I just love how enveloped you get with this world. Everything feels like it has a purpose. Everything has an answer. It's just not told to you in the most flippant way possible.
Kind of like you get all the information on like a need to know basis. Never left asking too many questions that won't be answered in like the next episode or something.
It's so refreshing to watch the world unravel around you with characters like Marcel expanding upon the magic of this world between the spells used by the elves and the special magic used by the gnomes. Or you have someone like Laios, whose expertise on monsters makes sure we at all times know what we are dealing with, and you get a fun way to add depth to the encounters. I mean, that's how I was like in middle school. I was very fascinated by biology and zoology. Still am. There's a lot of cool stuff out there, and it's always fascinating to read up about it. But the cooking, this show makes some tasty looking stuff, even though, yes, it would be kind of terrifying to eat a giant scorpion.
I think I said this when we did the winter anime episode, but to repeat it, I need a Delicious in Dungeon cookbook. Obviously, they have to change certain ingredients because we don't have monsters like that in the real world, but still, just this is one of those shows you cannot watch on an empty stomach.
Well, that's the fun part about this show. As it's gone by a weekly release, people were constantly making dishes from the show in the real world, obviously with more reality based ingredients. The show finds a way to keep fandom interested, and it holds in its audience.
Do you have a favorite recipe?
Honestly, the last few episodes where they focus on dumplings, probably my favorite ones.
Those are good ones.
Though there's a lot of good food seen in this show, and I would be happy to try all of it. I'm already an adventurous eater. I would be down to try everything this show has to offer.
There is one thing that has kind of validated me. For those who don't know, I'm not the biggest fan of mushrooms. When one of the characters expressed that, I felt seen.
I'm mixed on mushrooms. They have to be prepared a certain way. Not that I'm like super picky, I will eat them, but I get it. I just like how this main cast of characters are, like I said, an entirely new batch of weirdos. I love Chilchuck taking his rogue and locksmith job very seriously, but also has an intense hatred for mimics because of his previous work and experiences in the dungeon. And Marcel being this very timid, very like not pseudo aware of her actions and the consequences that come from them, but her aloofness is also a lot of fun. And Senshi being the real heart of this show. And I like that he wasn't above being like he wasn't better than everyone else. He still made mistakes. He still has lapses of judgment. His backstory, when we get to that, is very tragic, and you get why the characters are there. You get their drive. You get their what they wanted to do in life.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only downside so far is the fact that a lot of the more secondary characters don't get a lot to them, but it helps to still fill out the world with other parties and other characters that we do need to keep track of.
Yeah, like I like the way this show is structured where, yeah, 90% of the time you are following the core four and later five once they add the
Itsuzumi.
Once she joins the party, that's like a core five. But I like the other episodes where we shift the focus to some of the other people, and maybe once in a while we step out of the dungeon and kind of explore a little bit of the outer world. But yeah, 90% of the time it's focused on the main party.
What helps is that the show takes its time with introducing its world, because I remember a lot of early complaints were, really, is this it? Just venturing through the dungeon and cooking whatever they fight? That's it? And it's like, listen, I understand if some people do not like the show. That's fine. But some of the criticisms I saw felt like they weren't actually paying attention to the show. And maybe it's just because I've watched this show from start to finish multiple times as the episodes were getting released with different friends. But they introduce things that mean a lot to the story as time goes on. You find out why the head of the island wants the magic from the Mad Mage. You understand why the elves, especially the Canaries, are so hated upon by everyone else. And you understand why these characters are like that. It's so cool because you get the main drive of Laios wanting to find Fallon, but then you also get to see different perspectives, like from Cabru's party, where he's he almost comes off as a little bit of aloof and unaware of just how mediocre he and his party are. But you understand through his viewpoint and all the episodes that focus on him and his party how he works. He doesn't go through the world thinking about everything around him. He views it through the people he talks to.
That's what I like about his character, and the more we learn about him, the more we learn he really is just a people person. I like that about him, that he only ever really has the best intentions, which I can't really say about the rest of his party.
No, and then when we get to like Shuro's party, where he just wants to find Fallon to marry him, everyone else is either just connected to Shuro in the more like as a retainer and not really like, hey, I need you to help me here. I'm looking for adventurers. They're with him because of his origin of being from, as the show implies, the East. It's very interesting to see how they all work off of one another, especially since we don't get a lot of times where all the characters, or at least the three parties that we follow, are in the same spot, especially when we find out what happens to Fallon later on because of the Mad Mage. That big encounter near the end of the series is where everything changes.
Before we get there, one episode we have to talk about, which in hindsight is kind of the best example of foreshadowing. Episode 6 with the living paintings, because this is the episode where we meet both Prince Delgo, who eventually becomes the king, and while we don't realize this at the time, this is the introduction of the Mad Mage.
Like I said, the show sprinkles in the details only for them to pay off like at a later. We see that Senshi and his relationship with the orcs is strong because after they encounter the Mad Mage outside of the paintings and the Mad Mage takes Fallon away, we see how the orcs that they run into recognize Senshi and actually very helpful to him and his party. It's just a really cool world and story that they tell. And before we get to the shift in, things got real, can I say, like, for the first time in a while, an anime actually had a different approach to fan service. And it's very funny to talk about that because with this show, you might be thinking, oh, what? So they're going to have women in scantily clad clothes and all the normal fan servicey stuff. Senshi is actually the bearer of the fan service because of the multiple upskirt shots and focused on his waist area. It's very funny with how they flip the anime fan service trope because there's maybe just one scene that comes close to normal anime fan service stuff where Fallon and Marcel are taking a bath together. But even then, their bodies are not the main focus. Everything is still, through the cinematography, shot in a fairly respectable and tasteful manner.
Oh, yeah.
And you find that these characters are, and maybe this is just how I think, these characters are more appealing and attractive because the show is not shoving it in my face with how appealing these characters are. It's like how there was this one anime we talked about maybe 2 years ago, or maybe it was last year, where we were like, I pointed this out because the show was like, man, this show really wants me to find this main character attractive. They're literally using a character to explain to the audience how hot this character is. And that's boring because then it's just like, well, shut up. I don't really care anymore because you're making the character more about fan service material than an actual character.
That's just a really bad example of tell, don't show.
Because here it's like these characters are appealing. They got different body types, different romantic interests. And I mean, some people could say or, try to downplay the queer aspect of this show, but I think a lot of the characters are on that queer spectrum. I don't think there's really any fighting that because of how a lot of people like to make Marcel and Laios fan art. And that's fine. I get it. Because Marcel is the one constant female character in the dungeon party until they meet Itsuzumi. But it's very obvious Marcel has a lot of affection for Fallon.
Oh, yeah, that was more than apparent. Even back when I watched the first 3 episodes, I'm like, I wonder if there's history there.
And there is. They take time to show Marcel and Fallon as younger students at this magic school. It's very interesting because you can't really play it off as, oh, they're just friends who have a really close bond with one another, or as Deke would do with this original Sailor Moon dub. The two obvious lesbians are cousins, which makes that whole 5 times worse than them just being lesbians because there's no problem with that. But I remember when that show did that, where it's just like, these two are cousins. And it's like, well, show, the body language and how they interact with one another is very much, anime is so, in the US are so weird of how they handle queer characters. It's maddening. You think after Steven Universe and other shows broke that barrier, it's like, okay, we can stop being flippin' weird about it. And it's like, no. And it's just like, oh, okay, show. When we get to beyond the halfway point, we find out that the mad mage that they encountered took Fallon and made her a chimera. Part dragon, part, I don't think it's a harpy because of how the harpies look in this show, but the winged, feathered aspect that's mixed in with the obvious dragon parts. It's funny because I think people at this point in time were very much waiting for something to happen because they were getting bored with the constant just focus on food and world building.
I would have been okay with that if that was all the show was. But I also kind of get that with shonen anime, there has to be some sort of escalation eventually.
Which is funny because technically shonen is not just the big battle shows and such. It could be a lot of things, but we'll get to that another time. And seeing what is essentially a full, I guess in video game terms, a raid party trying to take down Fallon in her new chimera form goes as badly as you would expect it to. Characters get wiped out left and right, knocked out, or taken out of the scene entirely. And then you realize the actual stakes of the situation, of why this is important for Laios or Shuro to take down the Mad Mage. And then when everyone else arrives back at the surface as Laios' party just journeys deeper, we find out that everything outside is not great. Because they're like, oh, wow, look at that ship out there. Oh, geez, those are the Canaries. We have to get to the Lord of the Island now.
The Canaries are bad news.
Yes, Itsuzumi and the introduction to the Canaries is really late into the 24 episodes, but they still help, and you get why they are important in the story. I remember seeing posts from a Delicious in Dungeon Facebook group saying, Itsuzumi is so pointless. Why is she in the story? And it's just like, y'all are not paying attention. Again, they talk about her wanting to find a spell in the dungeon that can reverse her half beast transformation. And if you look very closely at one of the canaries, the very tall elf with the, I guess they're like split pigtails, like long pigtails. I don't know what the hairstyle is called exactly. You can tell because of the world building and introduction to Itsuzumi that one of them can also transform into a werebeast. So you need these. And like we've talked about, the elves have shown to see themselves as superior to everyone else because of their longevity and how powerful their magic is. And for people who complain about like Marcel having extremely powerful forbidden magic, that was hinted at like multiple times. She wasn't just the base healer or the like sage or warlock or whatever fantasy trope of I know healing and offensive magic.
Her magic can do some damage.
There's so much here, and I feel like sometimes people just aren't paying attention because they're hung up on the fact that they're going to cook whatever they kill. In general, you all need patience since you know they will start to dive into stuff like Chilchuk's backstory, Ituzumi's connection with Shuro and their relationship with his party, past party members reuniting with Laios, the mystery of the ghosts, why Cabru's favors his connections with humans than monsters, and you get the idea. Just let the show take its time with revealing everything. It's just like a really cool series, and the animation is wonderful. I thought Studio Trigger did an amazing job.
They did. This is one of those shows that, like a lot of Trigger shows, this one just has really good character animation. Like comic timing is perfect, and they even have fun like experimenting with different art styles in probably one of the funnier episodes where they meet all of the different imitations.
Yeah, I told a friend of mine was like, I am never going to forgive you for making this comparison. But the imitators from the shapeshifter encounter was like trying to tell a AI machine to replicate the designs, and they keep messing it up. Like how Jeff's video talks about how the different races see each other differently. And you can understand that by how they would see one another.
It is just kind of funny though how all the Laios imitations are like the easiest ones to tell apart.
I love the like where they instantly take away that one Marcel copy, and then honestly the hardest ones were the Chilchucks, because at least with the Senshi clones, only one of them was fake. But I love how the rest of the party was very much like that has to be the real one, right? Was he always this goofy looking? And Senshi's just like, what the hell, man? I never looked this rugged and handsome. While it does have a lot of the Studio Trigger isms in their design work with how they warp and shape the designs to help express something, I do like that they don't go full on Trigger with this show. Like, they do it in a way that feels constrained and reasonable, especially when like they use it in those very specific moments, like when they're running away from the Undine, and you see Chilchuk do what is essentially a play on the famous Lupin the Third run. If you look up footage of the famous Lupin run, you'll see what I mean.
Oh, yep.
I liked how they went about the designs of all the characters. I like how the dwarves look. I love how the elves look. I love how the half-foots look, and I like how the gnomes look. And I also like how the orcs are more pig-like instead of like trollish monster-looking stuff that we normally do orcs with.
It's a more softer approach, which kind of helps because these orcs aren't monsters. They're people from a different culture.
Exactly, and how their backstory is essentially dealing with colonialism and such, of getting pushed away from the above world, so they had to go take shelter inside the dungeon, but are struggling to survive in the dungeon because they can't go back up without being either killed on sight or discriminated against. I think the only ones I'm not fully in love with, and it's only because we've only seen one of them right now, are the Oni designs. Because Inutade, voiced by Xanthe Hyun, who I've already kind of had a mixed reaction to this character. It's not really the design inherently, it's more the hair and the more childlike look on the face and her mannerisms that irk me a little. Only because it's like they play her out to be way too childlike. There are just some things I would have changed a little bit.
I get that.
And it's also just like because, again, we've only seen one Oni and she's the only one. And I know that they have other Oni designs, but I hope we get to see more of those because they don't really flesh out the backstory of the Oni that much. I think they are the only species outside of the kobolds to get the least amount of world building and focus because everyone else, you understand the elves, the gnomes, the half-foots, and the human. So I hope we get to see more of them or something of the culture and such of that world because I know we still have plenty to go with the manga.
The manga has 14 volumes, and I'm not quite sure how much the anime has adapted already. There's plenty of material left to cover.
So hopefully they'll expand more on there. Now, the voice cast, I like both the sub and the dub, but I have to give it to the dub cast this time around because I am so amazed of who they were able to get for the show and how well they do. Like we have obvious like anime voice actors like Casey Mongilo as Chilchucks, and of course as we talk about Sungwon Cho as Sinchi.
Yep.
We'll talk a little more about him in a second because I want to gush about his performance. But Emily Rudd and Damian Haas as Marcel and Laios are the biggest surprises to me because Emily Rudd is Nami from the live action One Piece series that they do. And Damian Haas was, I think, one of the Smosh guys.
Yep.
And it's interesting to see how natural he comes off with his voice work because anytime I've seen a lot of voice work done by YouTubers, it's not great, but a lot of that can also be chalked up to bad production stuff. Like, not really their fault. It painted a bad picture for me about them coming into the world of voice work. But here, I'm super excited to see more get into the world of anime and such because, you know, Sungwon Cho was a voice actor before getting into anime. And I think, and this is a whole cast of great actors.
Oh, for sure.
Like Lisa Reinhold, Marin Miller, Mike Lauer, AJ Beckles, Cedric L. Williams, Ginny Yokobori, Keith Silverstein pops up, Rebecca Thomas is great, and Daniel Walton, Jennifer Sun Bell, Doug Stone, and such. Like a lot of well-known and some veteran voice actors pop up, like Derek Stephen Prince. But I was so amazed by the appearance of Corey Burton as Tansu, the gnome diplomat of the dungeon. And if you know anything, Corey Burton's one of those veteran voice actors that you've heard like throughout your life as a kid and as an adult. He's like the voice for Count Dooku and the Star Wars stuff right now. He's Dale from the original Rescue Rangers. He's Cad Bane from the Clone Wars series. He's like everywhere. He's Shockwave from Transformers and such. And you've probably seen him in Kingdom Hearts as like Yin Sid and Ansem the Wise. So to hear his voice in an anime, and from what I can tell, it's his first anime role that's not from a like video game or cartoon from the US, was surprising because you're expecting all the great ones. I wouldn't have been shocked if Steve Blum showed up here. But to hear Corey Burton out of the blue, and it probably helped that Netflix uses union wages and stuff for its voice work and actors for the
Yeah,
most
that
parts.
that would make sense. We have heard Corey Burton in all of like the Disney Ghibli dubs. So he's not completely new to anime, but as far as series, yeah, it was kind of surreal to hear him.
But those are different. Like, not to try to differentiate Ghibli dubs and normal anime dubs. No longer do you hear like John DiMaggio in anime because he was doing anime voice work, but he's also more known for his US work. And Ghibli dubs are different because of the more US based talent that they use.
Fair.
You're not wrong. I'm just saying I mean, I don't want to gatekeep voice work, but it's like there's a difference between a typical anime dub and a Ghibli dub.
More to the point, though, I'm hoping that this example, Corey Burton joining the Delicious in Dungeon cast, I hope it starts to break the walls a little bit between the usual cast that like Funimation at the time, now Crunchyroll, and the other anime distributors use. I kind of want to see a mix of a lot of the veteran voice actors for like Western animation and English anime dub actors.
What the industry needs to do is actually pay people the proper amount that they need to. Because, like, the reason why you don't hear some voice actors anymore or have seen them shift over to more US based productions is because of how little they are paid for the dubs. So that's why you don't hear a lot. I mean, it's complicated. Anime needs to unionize on both the production side of things and the acting and voice work side of things. So
Oh, 100%.
we're getting off track here. I mean, not that it's not fun to talk about this stuff, but we're here to talk about the Dungeon Meshi performances. And I think the best one who completely steals the show is Sung-Wan Cho as Senshi. You see Senshi really shift as a character as the guide through the dungeon and the main chef who helps out with making the dishes. And then the other party members like start to cook more and even do the whole narration of what they're doing with the dish that they're crafting. But I think it was either the second to last episode or the third to last episode when we finally learn about Senshi's backstory, about how he was part of a dwarven mining crew who found a dungeon and then one by one were taken out by a hippogriff. And through that one episode, you see his acting range go through the ringer. Like he has to do younger Senshi, he has to do scared, he has to go through all the emotions. Even still has to do the more goofier stuff, like when they go through the changeling, like mushroom circles, which are based around the superstition of like folklore. When you see flowers and mushrooms in a circle, in some folklore, I think it's mostly like European folklore.
Mm-hmm.
That's like stay the F away. Like, do not step through that or else something bad's going to happen. And you see him, this is right after he goes through the ringer of telling his tragic backstory, going back to a younger self. And then when the changeling spores happen, everyone changes. Laios is a dwarf, Marcel is a half-foot, Chilchuck is a tall man, and Senshi gets turned into an elf, so he has to play this more foppish version of Senshi. And it is probably one of the funniest parts of this show, in a show that's already really funny.
Going into the show, I was already just a fan of Sungwon Cho's vocal performances. I think this show easily his best because he gets to really stretch his vocal range. The example that you used of the Senshi turning into the Bishonen elf, this is just another great example of how well this show balances between humor and drama in a way that never really feels jarring.
That was another criticism I saw for the show. Like early on, people were like, well, the tonal shift's kind of weird when they go from serious to silly. It's not that bad upon rewatch. It's never as jarring as something like some comedy anime where they're extremely silly, but then in the last third, they have to be really serious. Like, really serious, guys. This is no laughing matter anymore. And it's like, way to ruin your own show.
Even here, when starting with the Red Dragon arc, things start to get more serious. But then when the humor does hit, it hits that much harder because the stakes are higher.
Well, I think what also helps is that they implement the drama and comedy elements of the show very early on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's never as jarring when, oh, that's a lot of blood to come out of that one character who got crushed by Fallon's dragon form. Something akin to that, or like, yeah, when they're fighting the harpies and they're all complaining about one another, and then a body drops in front of them. It's like, oh, something else has entered the room, and we need to zip our lips and take care of this.
I think they established the tone pretty well with the first episode where they're going on this mission to rescue Fallon, who is suspected to, or they want to get there before she's digested by the dragon. So already the stakes are pretty high, but then things will get sillier once they make their first meal in the dungeon.
Well, it's like they needed to dial back a little after, like, we get that whole tragic backstory from Senshi to then see him as an elf be like, where's the pot, Senshi? He's like, it was too heavy. And then the episode after, where they're all getting like punched by the gargoyles, his reaction when getting like kicked by a gargoyle is made me and my friend laugh so hard just because of the sounding oh. It seems like this dub had a lot of fun behind the scenes stuff. At least I hope so, because this is one of those shows where it's absolutely fun to do voice work for. Kind of like how the 100 Girlfriends anime sounds like the people in charge fully understood what kind of show they were doing. So they were just like, be as silly as you want.
And those are often my favorite dubs. They get to play with the material as much as they can.
And it also helps that the show is very much on the level of being silly. I love the joke in the first episode when Laios is describing the parasitic nature of the plant that caught Marcel. And it didn't even animate this part. And he's just like, isn't that crazy? And it literally cuts to a closer up image of Marcel's reaction to him being weird. Like, that's like a YouTuber editing a joke, but in an official anime production. It knew how to balance and pace itself out. It knew how to translate the jokes. They knew how to make the punchlines work. It's not like how some anime go through a wonky translation from paper to animation where it's just like, oh, that joke's not going to work. But it's part of the manga, so I guess we got to keep it. But here, it just works. It is funny on a consistent basis. I was laughing all the time throughout this show. And the two different openings were great. like with the one with the song by Bump of Chicken, which I think that's very tongue in cheek about, you know, what the whole show's about. And then it's like the band doing the opening song is Bump of Chicken, who's a good band. I love their work. It's
Same.
funny. It's just, again, wink, wink. And then the second one, I love the little detail of once Itsuzumi joins the cast, they add her into the opening.
I love when shows do that.
If you watch One Piece, when they have the crazy rainbow star opening during the arc where Luffy has to save Robin, there's one specific opening or episode where they have the two singers of the song put into the anime opening.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I love when shows can get to do that. And even though this is partially a more comedic show at points, the action is really good. I mean, it's Studio Trigger. Having bad action from them would have been a mind-blowing disaster. Like, you want your action to be good if it's a Studio Trigger anime. Just like how you want your Science Saru animation to be a little weird.
Trigger understood the assignment.
Which is funny because they did a commercial advertising the manga way back, like in 2018 or so, or maybe a little earlier than that. So to see them get the adaptation gig was fitting, because sometimes you see ads for like manga and graphic novels and it's like, this is very cool, I can't wait for the anime adaptation to look like this, and then it doesn't, and it's like, oh, okay. Why didn't you just get the same studio that did the commercial to do the show? It's just a good show. I don't know what else I need to say. It's got a compelling story, great character dynamics, a good balance of drama and comedy, very delicious food, which, yeah, they need to make a cookbook like stat. And it leads to it being probably one of, if not the most standout anime of the year so far. And that's saying something, because there's a lot of great anime this year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, well, who knows if our tune will change, cover the summer season, but at the very least, we know, and it was probably going to happen, that there is a second season that is getting made right now. And I have to say, it's been 1 week since it ended or so. I'm having withdrawals, man. I need my dungeon meshi fix every week, but oh well. I'm happy to wait a year and a half or so for them to make the next season. So.
However long it takes, to quote Jerry from Toy Story 2, you can't rush art.
You really can't, man. I hope the same team that worked on this are sticking around for the show. I bet they are. I hope they are. So we'll just have to see how that goes. But yeah, if you want a really unique fantasy anime that commits to the bit while still being a compelling series, give this one a watch. Like I said, it's my favorite anime of the year so far. Probably my favorite show of the year so far. And I just can't wait for more. I mean, I can, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I'm not sure if this is my favorite series of the year so far, because X-Men 97 still kind of holds the top spot. But as far as anime, yeah, this one's my number one so far, now that I've seen the full first season.
I think it's above X-Men 97 only because X-Men 97 is a continuation from the original show, where Dungeon Meshi is new from the ground up. As new as an anime adaptation can be of a manga that has already finished its run. But still, that's splitting hairs. Both are great shows. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. But next time, I guess we're going to be doing some like happy charity work or something, because, we're going to be talking about Smiling Friends, which is, a charity where we help people smile and such, I guess. I can't wait to talk about that show, because it's one that we knew about, but time got the best of us, and we just had to wait until the second season to finish up before I felt like, okay, let's talk about the show.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to diving into that one. But until next time, Cameron, where can everyone find you online?
You could find me on Twitter and Blue Sky. I am not calling it X. At Cam's Eye View, I have my own website called camseyeview.biz where I review animated films and shows from around the world called The Other Side of Animation. I also have a Patreon at patreon.com/camseyeview. That's where you can find me.
And you guys can find me on various social media sites at Captain K42. You can check out my quick thoughts on letterboxd.com/Coach K42. And you can follow Renegade Pop Culture on Facebook and that place at Ren Pop Culture. You can also find us on YouTube, on Podchaser. Consider supporting our Patreon at patreon.com/Renegade Pop Culture. Listen to all of our podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And last but not least, everything can be found at renegadepopculture.com. Need an escape? So do we. That'll do it for this episode of Renegade Animation. We will catch you guys later. Peace out.